I'd like to introduce you to Crystal Foster, who's a psychologist, and Crystal's going to talk to us about finding our light in the dark. She will speak for, what do we give you, 10 minutes? Was it? 10 minutes, and then a few minutes for questions, and that will see us through to lunch. So, thank you very much. Welcome, Crystal.
Thank you. My name's Crystal Foster. I'm a holistic... Oh.
Push the button.
Yep, we go. So I work as a holistic psychologist up in Te Aomuru, further north. What does holistic psychologist mean? Well, I trained as a clinical psychologist, and I sort of, from there, felt that I hadn't really grasped everything I wanted to know about creating mental well-being, so I just continued my journey and kept learning. But this talk today has been informed by the people that I've walked alongside who've been through serious trauma, and it's a little bit about their journeys back home to themselves after going through really difficult events. So, talking about spiritual concepts, the soul. So I'm aware that when we talk about these things, as has been said earlier, we all have our own perspective about what that means. So for me, just briefly and simply, the soul is an eternal and infinite part of us that existed before we were born and continues on after we leave this physical body. And that it's an internal felt sense that we can experience. And sort of to illustrate that, my 6-year-old boy, he lost his grandfather a couple of weeks ago. And a couple of days afterwards, he just came up to me randomly and said, "Mum, when we die, we go somewhere else. I can't explain it. We just go somewhere else after this." And I just nodded and he went on his way. He wasn't asking me, he was just making a statement. But for me, it was about him having that internal sense that there's something else after this. Life doesn't just cease to happen once we die. For some, it's also extends out wider to a connection with all things. As Rose Petty has put it, we are the stars, the trees, we're everything that exists. And for some people, they really do connect with that feeling of oneness with all things. When trauma happens, that felt connection with the soul can be disrupted. Not necessarily will be, but it can be. And this, from what I have seen, has been from the incredible pain. When someone goes through something that creates such huge, overwhelming feelings of pain, usually I'm talking about the sorts of trauma where pain has been inflicted on one person by another person. Some of the ways that it's been described has been feelings of being shattered, alone, lost, or like they don't know who they are anymore. So to try to cope with pain, because, you know, as humans, naturally, we'd rather not feel pain if we could help it. Sometimes we do things to try to block it out. There are brain-level events that we don't have any control over that can affect whether or not we actually remember what happened to us. Sometimes we might lose awareness during the actual event. Sometimes afterwards we might not be able to recall all of it. But for when we do recall, sometimes we might not want to feel all the memories and emotions when they come up. So we might do things to try to take our minds off what happened. So this could be as simple as staying distracted, or as intense as taking drugs, alcohol, harming ourselves to escape the pain. For some people, it's engaging in risky behaviour because that forces them into the present moment because they're in life or death situations, so they can't be somewhere else in the past. And for others, it's fixating on a person, like one person who brings good feelings to them to help drown out the pain, which makes them vulnerable if that relationship were to end. if a person becomes too good at this, they can start developing a numbness to all of their emotions. So when you start becoming numb to the pain, you can start becoming numb to joy, to love, to positive emotions that we all have. Sometimes can stop seeing the point in being alive at all. One of the men from the abuse inquiry that's happening right now has described this as, when I was in that world, I lost the ability to love. And I think it's happened for so many people in New Zealand and around the world, really. So when we shut off, we can lose that felt sense of ourselves as an eternal being. So if we think about the soul or the spirit, or wairua, the wairua aspect, as being like a flowing river, Wiramu described it as a spring. So sometimes when we go through something really traumatic, the spring can actually stop flowing and the water starts to stagnate. So to me, this is when we cut off from our feelings. We can start to get to that stagnating place because our soul's no longer flowing anymore. I'll read you a story of a woman I've called Annie, who's really an amalgamation of the journeys of many of the people that I've seen in her way through. Annie was born into a chaotic family environment and wasn't able to bond with her mother. Her mother had her own struggles and wasn't ready to care for another baby. From early childhood onward, Annie suffered frequent sexual and emotional abuse and neglect. As she grew up and began finding her own relationships, Annie developed a pattern of becoming close to partners who were abusive and felt entitled to her body. Annie used alcohol in her younger years to escape from painful emotions and later moved to food and other distractions. She found in adulthood that when she fully focused her attention on helping other people, she didn't notice her own pain as much. Annie didn't trust herself and didn't feel connected to her own source of wisdom. She didn't feel she had any. She was constantly second-guessing herself and had become reliant on others to tell her what to do, which made her vulnerable to being controlled by other people. Annie came for help because as much as she tried to squash down her emotions, they were rising to the surface and making themselves known. She was crying after years of numbness and responding with anger to some of those in her life who did things she didn't agree with. It felt scary and overwhelming, and there was a sense of having lost control with no way to regain it. So there's two different ways we could look at what might be happening for Annie. And this has also been touched on before as well. So one is that her tears and anger coming forth now are a sign of a potential mental disorder emerging, maybe depression or post-traumatic stress. Or we could see her tears and anger as signs that her wairua is flowing again after years of being shut off. It's possible to hold both, but it really depends on what the person in front of you, how they want to see it and wish to see it. So Annie took the path of learning how to hold space for her own emotions, despite how painful they were at times. We used metaphors like riding the waves of emotion or being the sky above the storm that eventually returned to the sun. As Annie learned how to turn toward her own feelings with acceptance and curiosity, she started to understand why she was having these feelings and develop compassion for herself. So through this process, Annie found clarity underneath her emotions. Once she had felt through the pain of it, she found understanding underneath. And she started to find that she always knew what the next right step was to take, learning to trust herself. And I call this learning to hear the voice of her own soul, because she started to experience her own wisdom. So holding space for your emotions is like expansion. So if you look at the seed here, germinating, if you imagine the seed before it has broken through, and then while it's breaking through, it looks like it's completely shattered and destroyed. But really, what's happening is it's making room for something new to emerge. So it can feel painful to turn towards our difficult emotions, but when we do, we're making room for new growth. So I don't know what the time is, but other things that can help us to get our river flowing again, besides feeling through our own emotions, is taking good care of ourselves. So all of these things that we've been taught and that we know are good for our mental well-being, what I've seen with others and in myself too, is that when we do these things, we hear the voice of our own soul more clearly. It's like the interference is minimized when we take really good care of ourselves. And something that I've called having soul time, which is unstructured time, where you do whatever your soul feels like doing. So this isn't, I've been told that I need to do yoga, or this is when I drive to my meditation class because I know that's good for me, even though I don't really feel like it right now. This is something different, and it's something that you tune into yourself and you feel, whatever do I feel like doing right now? And if that's sleeping, if that's talking to a friend, if that's going out in nature, whatever it is, allow your soul to show you where you want to be. And of course, as has also been said, this applies to all of us. I don't see a divide between people in the mental health system and those of us who help, because we're all human and we all have emotions and we all need to find the voice of our own souls. So collectively, whether or not we've been through direct trauma ourselves, we can feel the pain of our parents, our ancestors, and even those around us. To move forward, I feel like the best thing we can do is not to deny what's happened in the past, but to fully understand it, to learn about all of our collective history, and to allow ourselves to feel whatever emotion that brings up in us. Because from there, we can figure out how to proceed so that we can create a better societal structure and a better life for all New Zealanders, so that our future generations grow up and experience the mental well-being that we know that they can if we create the right conditions. So thank you very much. Any questions?
Wonderful. Thank you, Crystal. Questions? Comments? I just wanted to ask you about soul time. I mean, it's a nice idea. I think Aristotle said an unexamined life is not worth living. And I wondered what is the connection between soul time and self-examination?
Well, when you're having soul time, you haven't set an agenda for yourself. So your mind can often come up with things that you might not have come up with if you'd busied yourself for the whole day. Like what I've noticed is that inspiring ideas don't just arrive if I'm just always busy all the time. But if there's a break and there's some space for thought, then suddenly things start to come and then new directions emerge and, things, So I think it's important to have that time.
Contemplation. Any comments? Any questions from this presentation? Over here. You're going to have to run, Maureen.
My name is Peter, and I'm from the South Island. Now, one of the aspects that I'm noticing is that this is a discussion about spirituality, the expression of spirituality within the body, and yet there seems to be a constant confusion between the spirit in its psychological sense and the spirit in its true spiritual, non-physical sense. The process of connecting to one's spiritual essence, if you like, I believe, and in my experience, is exactly what you're starting to describe. And I wonder if you could point to procedures or techniques or practices by which to not just do nothing and wait, but to more actively seek that?
Mm-hmm. Well, as we all really have to, I think, while we're forging forward in this realm, reflect on my own experience. So when I spend time in nature, I find that the mind is no longer cluttered with the everyday structures that we are a part of. So it's like a space has been cleared for direct connection between the earth that is our home, and I believe that, you know, we're all birthed from. Messages are sent through that, in that way. I don't even know if this is going to cut off, but whatever. On the way home from a difficult session once, I was driving past the Blue Spring and just stopped there just to allow myself to feel being in that environment, and it showed me that the river kept flowing, and it showed me that this person who'd been through this horrific stuff, she was still here. You know, the river had continued to flow of her life, despite what had happened, despite whatever rocks she'd come into contact with. And what I've noticed is that when we place ourselves in a completely natural setting, alone, quietly, if we have a question or something that we need to connect with spiritually, then the world will tell us, they will show us. That's what I've experienced.
Those are insights, thank you. Any further questions, comments? It behoves me now to thank Crystal for a very interesting presentation, and certainly one that is bang on the topic of today, and I appreciate that. Here's a small gift of thanks.